Welcome to Pario Magazine, where I chat with individuals who have a desire to create. Today, I am joined by a Melbourne-based stand-up comedian who is gearing up for a return to the Melbourne Comedy Festival in April. Welcome to Pario Magazine, Jai Cameron.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We're obviously here today to chat about the overall creative journey and the upcoming comedy festival show. Before we dive into that story, though, are you able to give our audience a quick intro as to who you are when you're off the stage?
Yeah, sure. So my name's John Cameron. I work at Arts Centre Melbourne in the schools team as the schools engagement coordinator. That's my full-time gig. And then outside of that, I guess I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm a writer, performer, do a bit of television and radio work. But I guess my biggest job that I do is being a full-time dad.
Okay, and that's obviously the major inspiration for this upcoming show.
Yeah, pretty much. This is the inspiration, I guess. So my daughter is now 13 weeks old. So I've literally been kind of writing the show pretty much during my wife's pregnancy, but also I guess the last 13 weeks have been the biggest inspiration. And I thought that it would be really nice to kind of put that into a show. So it's been good to really spend time with my daughter, I guess, trying to find out all the comedic material that I can. But yeah, it's been really, really nice.
So yeah, the show is called Daddy, and obviously, can you give us a sort of a brief rundown on? Obviously, it's about fatherhood, but the comedic aspects that you have found through that.
Yeah, well, I called it Daddy because every time people would come up to me, they would say, "How you going, Daddy?" And I'd be like, "Oh, this is really weird," because only my wife calls me that. But I was like, "Oh, this is a really interesting concept." But it's to do with fatherhood. I guess it's also, trying to figure out my position, I guess, as a younger person being a dad and how I'm dealing with work as well as a marriage that is about to go into its first year anniversary after 8 years together and COVID and kind of everything that's kind of multi-layered there. So it is kind of taking, I guess, my perspective on what parenthood and what fatherhood means for me, and I guess what the future might hold for my daughter in this kind of uncertain time. So it's very much about me. It's very much about my wife, but ultimately it's about my daughter and kind of what I think she's going to be like at my age and kind of what I'm hoping for her. So that's kind of the structure of the show. And of course, there's other things that come up, I guess, that are comedic that sometimes aren't to do with parenthood, but maybe it's just an interaction that I've had in my life. I reflect on my own parents, which is quite funny. Yeah, it's kind of a whole array, I guess, of observing parenthood and the joys and tribulations that come with it.
Okay, so from the sounds of it, it's a show that will resonate obviously with new fathers, but I imagine it sort of it still captures a wider audience as well.
Yeah, it sure does. It's probably for the dads. It's probably just as much for the mums or anyone, I guess, that is a parent or has children in their lives. But I think even if you don't have children, I think it will relate to you how one kind of, I guess, is maybe potentially thinking about parenthood potentially in their lives, but I guess isn't ready. Because I mean, this obviously is revealed in the show, but it's no surprise that Rory was a shock to my wife and I. And I guess it's also dealing with that shock in a way. I mean, she's the joy of our lives, and we're so grateful that we had her, but it wasn't in our plan, I guess, at this point to have a child. So it's also grappling with that. And I think it is universal. I think it will certainly be more for the parents, but I think if you don't have children, you'll still get a lot out of it. And of course, dealing, yeah, with a artsy dad who's a bit of a dramatic comedian, you can, yeah, probably relate to, I guess, how I'm dealing with parenthood.
Is there any concern that over dramatic side will come through in the daughter?
Yes, she is very dramatic. She has very dramatic facial expressions, very good use of her eyebrows, which is very good. She's also very good at a fake cry. So I do think it is going to be in her blood. I'm going to try and convince her to maybe do a career that is well paying and secure, maybe a doctor or a lawyer or, even something that makes her happy. Because, yeah, a career in the performing arts, particularly after COVID, is incredibly difficult. it is not 9 to 5, and we're always kind of looking for our next job as one job finishes. But I have a feeling she is probably going to have some kind of career in the arts based on her facial expressions and her fake crying.
And now that you've made a show about your daughter, do you think this is going to be a well of comedy gold that can be tapped for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really nice. I mean, it will get to a point, I guess, when my daughter knows what I'm doing and probably will say, Dad, you can't use any stories about me whatsoever, probably, when she hits high school. But for now, I'm going to use all the comedic content that I can out of her childhood. But yeah, it is wonderful. At this stage, it's funny because I guess the show is really only reflecting on her kind of up to 5 months. So it's not even going to touch on her as a toddler. So certainly I think there'll be a return or a follow-up show for next year's comedy festival. This is just focusing her literally sleeping, eating, and yeah, getting nappies changed basically.
Is this a show that you will show her when she's older, perhaps on her 21st?
It might be. It certainly will be recorded. It's a little bit crude. I'm going to see as well if I can actually have Rory strapped to me for the entire show because I'm tired ass and don't want to pay for babysitting. Plus, I think it would be really interesting trying to do an hour's worth of content with a child on me. As they say, you should never work with children or animals. So she's probably going to be in the room hearing it. She obviously won't remember it as a 13, 14 week old, but I probably will show her when she's old enough and she knows, that it's okay to swear, but not as a child.
That's good. So, on your sort of more backstory, how did you sort of first discover this passion for stand-up comedy?
Well, I got into music theatre and acting, I guess. And as anyone knows, in the music theatre world, there's not a lot of new writing, particularly in Australia. So it's always kind of roles that have been written and you've got to be somebody else. And that was really interesting to me. But I also thought about creating my own work and was really interested at one stage in playwriting. But anyone that's ever tried to write a play or a film knows how much work's involved because obviously you're creating multiple characters, you might be creating multiple scenes and all of that. And I was a little bit lazy and kind of thought, well, I don't want to spend years writing one show. I kind of just want to get it over and done with. And I was always kind of the class clown in high school. I kind of knew I was funny, but I had never obviously kind of pursued that either with Class Clowns at Comedy Festival or anything like that. I kind of was just the funny kid that was doing musicals. And so the year after I left high school in 2017, I thought, well, I don't have anything on my schedule for once. I had started a new job. I was studying a short course in music theatre and thought, well, I've got the time, the space to try and write a show. So I kind of did it a little bit differently to how other comedians do it. Most comedians will kind of do a 5-minute set and get up in a comedy room and try that out and try and find their voice. But I just went into writing a full 1-hour show at the Butterfly Club called Would You Like Fries with That? And it was based on my experiences of working at a very known fast food chain. I'm sure you can put two and two together. And I kind of thought that would be a great first show because I didn't know, for me, that was just a job. And I kind of thought, well, what have I actually gotten out of that that will help my career in performing arts? And alas, it was a comedy show because it was full of comedy. So of nuggets, literally and metaphorically. So I wrote that show. I did 3 performances at the Butterfly Club that all sold out. And it was basically a baptism of fire into the comedy scene. And from there, I kind of caught the bug a little bit. I probably should have just done a 5-minute set. It wasn't the best show, but I was surrounded by a lot of family and friends. There wasn't too many strangers that came to that show. And then I had a break in 2018 because that show took so long. It took 9 months to create. It's a lot of time and creative investment. And I was going to try and redo it for the comedy festival. And for whatever reason, the dates didn't work out. And then kind of left it for a little bit because I focused on some other projects in TV and radio, and then came back in 2019 with another show called Is It Just Me? And started doing some regional shows and did the comedy festival for 7 shows. And then COVID hit in 2020. So again, that was a bit of a write-off. And then I kind of felt like I had something to say again with my follow-up show to that, which was a show called Domestic, which was about, I guess, married life and my wife working on a COVID ward and me being in arts admin working from home. And then now that the momentum's starting to build, I think in my career, there was some good reviews last year and shows have been selling out. There's a bit of an audience, I guess, to retain that. I'm kind of now doing an annual show, which is kind of good, but it puts a time pressure cooker, I guess, to write a show. So I've kind of written this whole show in kind of 2 months, where previously I'd spent a whole year writing a show and obviously trialing it out in little 5-minute sets, which has been really good. So yeah, that's been the career, I guess, from launching straight in with a show now to hopefully doing an annual show, and then hopefully moving forward and doing some touring interstate, which would be lovely.
Okay, so yeah, like you said, kicking off with an hour show, that's not the typical path that a stand-up comedian would take. Was that a difficult way to go, do you think? Or would you, if you could go back and redo it, would you do those 5-minute sets first?
I definitely would do the 5-minute sets. I guess what was really good about it in a way was just, I guess, rolling with the punches straight away. So I've never been as terrified as I have been doing that first show. I do lots of things. I do celebrant work. I do acting work. I do television, radio, interviews like this. And I get somewhat nervous doing those things. But I guess for comedy, because they're either going to laugh or they're not going to laugh, the stakes are really high. And that first show, because I hadn't tried it out, I wasn't sure on my voice or the delivery. Plus, I had to learn an hour of my own content, because even though you're writing the jokes, they're not always sitting in your head. It was really stressful. So that first show was, I don't even remember how it went. It was like autopilot. And then the following shows, once I knew there were a couple of laughs in there, they were really good. But in hindsight, like looking back on it, I would never be able to perform that show again. And it is very different, I guess, to my voice as a comedian. I think I was trying to do this really edgy kind of politically incorrect show, whereas I guess I've kind of moved more into storytelling, observational, with a little bit of dark humor in there. But I certainly would tell myself to do the 5-minute sets and to find my voice as a comedian before launching into a show. But as I said, it was kind of nice to do a baptism of fire, do 3 shows and kind of learn the ropes of what stand-up comedy is, because there is lots of things that kind of make a really successful show. But as I said, the core of it is, will people laugh or won't they? And they will or they won't.
And I guess starting with that 1 hour show, everything is going to seem easy in comparison now.
Yeah, well, yeah, doing a full hour, kind of doing 5 minutes is kind of really nice now, because you kind of can really condense it. It's nice doing lots of different time sets. I mean, I've done 2.5 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes. And it's really nice because I guess the more time pressure you put on a set, the more you kind of take, the excess dialogue out. Because sometimes, obviously, when you know you've got to do an hour, you'll kind of just fill with extra words or kind of more of a story. Whereas when you're under time, you've really got to get to the punchlines and make people laugh really quickly. There's no kind of setup time that you would have in an hour show. So there's some positives and negatives to both. But yeah, it certainly made everything after a little bit easier, but still I've had multiple nights where nobody laughs, and it's really awkward because it's not as if you have extra material lined up that you can go to. You've kind of just got to keep doing your shtick and hoping that people kind of keep jumping on board, because otherwise, yeah, it's a bit awkward when nobody's laughing and you're standing up there trying to deliver your content. So kind of learned all those little tricks of the trade, which have been really helpful after that.
So with those sets that kind of were absolute bombs, do you think that's part of the process of learning stand up and growing as a comedian?
Oh, for sure. It is so beneficial. It is the worst feeling in the world. You feel like you're kind of drowning in the middle of the ocean with no paddleboard and no support, and you're kind of not sure whether you'll get back to shore. And it feels like hours when you're standing up there. It is so beneficial. Every comedian, even the successful comedians that probably you or I or the general public watch time and time again, will still bomb. And it's part and parcel, I guess, of being a stand-up comedian. There are multiple times where a joke doesn't land, or I find particularly too, if the audience, if you kind of get them offside at any point in your set, it is very hard to get them back on board. And I guess that is something you learn as a stand-up comedian. And I speak with comedians time and time again, and it could be as simple as, you know, a joke you've said has offended somebody, or it could be as simple as your delivery, or yeah, maybe the material's not funny. And I guess it's really important to do those 5-minute sets before you get to the hour stand-up show. But it's so important to bomb, to forget words, to forget your set, to struggle to not be funny at all. And it's something every comedian goes through.
Yeah, do you think it's impossible to sort of become a great comedian without those bomb sets?
Oh, for sure. I don't think any comedian would say that they've never bombed or they've never failed. And I think for a lot of comedians, I guess you really just have to accept failure. And I found as well, standing up there in front of an audience, sometimes if they're not laughing, once I just accept that, it kind of ends up being funnier. And sometimes when something doesn't work and you point that out to an audience, it's even funnier because everyone acknowledges that it wasn't funny. But it's so important to bomb, to fail, to struggle as a comedian. And of course, in life, it's kind of the same thing, because if we're not having failures in our own lives, we don't really have funny material. If everything's happy and it's going well, it's not really funny for people. So it's kind of important that it happens in our real life as well as our stage life. And I think, yeah, every comedian in their life has gone through that time and time again, just punches failure every time. So yeah, it's really important.
And you spoke about how your comedic voice has evolved over the years. Who were those early influences and how have those influences evolved over the years as well?
Yeah, really interesting. I kind of don't know where my voice came from, I guess, when I started. I kind of really liked that crude, dark, black humour, maybe a little bit politically incorrect. I used to watch a lot of British sitcoms, the old shows with my grandparents, which I really loved, which were more kind of innuendos, like "Are you being served?" and some others do have them. And they kind of were the start influences. And then I used to watch shows like Little Britain and Absolutely Fabulous. Again, lots of British, and then kind of evolved, I guess, into some American comedies, sitcoms, obviously Friends, but kind of The Office. And so I don't know, I think maybe every comedian I've spoken to heaps over my time have gone through it, where you feel like because you're new on the scene, you kind of need to make this important statement, I guess, or be really kind of in people's face to be noticed and to be heard. But I think it's kind of the opposite effect, that the more kind of you find your niche or what's specifically funny about you or what you bring to the table as a comedian is what works best for you, because obviously that's what you find funny and that's your selling point to other people. So kind of from there, yeah, it used to be really in your face kind of comedy that would be really probably politically incorrect and dark. And I think I ended up having some writing training, I guess, for my playwriting side, which I ended up focusing kind of on my stand-up comedy. And rather than punching down, what we would do is kind of take my observation and things that I have dealt with over my life and be able to use that as leverage to then go, great, I can do some dark humor around this, or some observational humor, because that's something I've experienced, as opposed to talking about an issue that doesn't relate to me or I haven't experienced. That's kind of one major change. But also, I think too, having the confidence around being able to do my show and to have my voice and be confident in it. I think there is a difference with comedians that can get up there with a microphone and know that the material's funny and they have the confidence, as opposed to a comedian that's a bit unsure whether they're going to get the laugh and a bit unsure in their voice. So I think the changes I've experienced are, one, confidence, being able to get up there and just acknowledge that people are going to laugh, or maybe they're not going to laugh. And I think that observational humor that has a little bit of darkness in it, but is from my experience as opposed to using other people's experiences.
You mentioned doing writing courses that weren't specifically comedic focused. Is that a big piece of advice you have for other comedians, to look outside the comedy world for inspiration and advice?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I've worked on a satire news TV show for Channel 31 called The Leak, where I was the executive producer and ran a writer's room. I think it's really good to obviously observe other comedians and get their style, to watch the really big comedians, all the Netflix specials, sitcoms, but yeah, trying to do different things, whether it is creative writing, writing in TV or for film, or trying to do 2.5 minutes or 5 minutes or an hour show, or even things outside of comedy. It could be poetry, it could be circus training, it could be physical training, kind of anything you can kind of do in your realm of creativity is really beneficial for your comedy, because you never know, one, whether you could incorporate that into your stand-up routine, or two, whether you might get a funny story out of going to circus training or working with a particular group of people. And I think it is really important to flex your muscles. You kind of have to try and do a bit of everything, whether that's radio or TV or writing or stand-up, because you never know where your next job's going to come from. And the more versatile you can be, the better it is. So yeah, they would be my recommendations for anyone wanting to get into the biz.
Perfect. So obviously the last couple of years have been tough for everyone. Has your comedy mindset sort of helped you get through that period by finding something to laugh about and turning that into a joke?
Yeah, it has actually. And I think it's been really important. I think my whole family kind of mindset is to look at the bright side of life, to quote Monty Python's. And it is really important, I think, because our family quote is always, it's better to laugh because otherwise you'll cry. And it has been the case over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And I would certainly give that recommendation to everybody else. And, you know, it is really funny looking at politicians, and it is a bit of a satire at the moment, watching the likes of Scott Morrison, you know, playing the ukulele on 60 Minutes, singing the
Yep.
wrong words. So yeah, looking at all the comedy aspects is really important. And I think that's been my mindset over the last few years. I don't know, to be honest, whether I'm sure the pandemic has affected everybody's comedy style in one way or another. I don't know consciously whether I've acknowledged that at this point, and kind of how the pandemic has changed my voice. I think it's maybe given me some more empathy, and maybe to be a bit more bold in some of the choices that I make, because we never know whether we're going to get back on stage or not. So maybe that's probably the biggest change I've seen over the pandemic.
Yeah, perfect. So then looking ahead after the comedy festival, what else is on the horizon for yourself in 2022?
Yeah, I am studying a uni degree, which will be a bunch of fun in business arts management. So I'll probably be dedicating a lot of time to that. I'm hoping to do a bit more of the comedy circuit scene and do some more 5-minute sets to prepare for my 2023 Melbourne Comedy Festival show. And I don't know, depending on how successful Melbourne season is of Daddy, whether or not it will be toured to other states. So that will be kind of the deciding factor to see if people actually like it. Because if it's a bit of a shit show, it'll probably be filed away, never to be seen again. So they're kind of the things on the horizon. There's also a television project I'm working on with RMI TV that we're going to film a pilot episode for. And I'm working on another secret TV project that is all kind of under wraps for now, but we'll see if that goes anywhere. I'm not really sure at this stage. Yeah.
With these comedy festival shows, is that sort of the exciting part where if this blows up at the comedy festival, it could take you all around the country in the next 6 months?
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. I mean, you kind of never know. Obviously, you benchmark it on how well people are laughing, how well it's selling, but there's no real way sometimes to kind of measure the success. And it depends. Every comedian will have their own limit of success, whether it's selling out or trying to sell the show on for touring purposes. But for me, it's nice to be able to do 10 shows in a row. And I would suggest if people want to come and see me, come see me towards the end of the season, because I'm always a little bit more funnier. So I would suggest doing that. But yeah, I'm hoping that it will be relatable to people and people will find it funny. So yeah, come along and see it if you're in Melbourne.
Alrighty, perfect. So finally, where's the best place for people to support you and track this creative journey moving forward?
Yeah, probably my Facebook page, which is Jai Cameron, Celebrant and Comedian. And you can also obviously head to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival website and type in Daddy and see all about the show.
Alrighty, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time and good luck with the festival.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for all your help.